What are things going to look like for us? What are our enterprises going to need to be doing in 3 years' time, 2025? So I want to invite Vincent, and I'd love to invite Sam up onto the stage where we can talk through what the trends, what the impacts, what the future is likely to hold for us. But guys, welcome. Thanks very much. Let's just start off with a very simple scenario here. What would you say is kind of just an overall image of what a forward-looking enterprise needs to be in 2025? Like, how is it going to be different to what it is now? Sam, do you fancy giving us a view?
Sure. So I think we at PMI talk a lot about hyper agility. That's kind of like a big theme for us. And I think there's three compelling reasons why this is important. The first is, we talk about resilience a lot, right? People overuse the term resilience, but when you think about the ability to be agile, the ability to make change happen, the ability to be adaptable, right? Our consumers and our customers are changing. We hear a lot of presentations about use cases and why no code is so relevant. But being adaptable leads to relevance, right? And I think relevance in a market where there are more competitors than ever before, consumers are more demanding, 500 million apps that are going to be created, like it's, 500 million apps, it's crazy numbers, right? And I think we've got to think about the operating model and the opportunity for us to be able to actually address that and actually see that as an opportunity is where hyper agility really, really comes into play. So, and again, at PMI, we really, really kind of push that hyper agility agenda.
Vincent?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting us to speak here. You guys have a wonderful conference. It's my first time at Creatio conference, so I'm excited to be here. I think sophistication digitally continues, in the next few years. And you talk about hyper agility, organizational agility. But, I think beyond that, right? Must have been something I said.
That was the other speaker that was meant to be here. Just got the...
Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I think the reality is, and maybe back to the last conversation, there's certain expectations about how people consume things and how people operate. And what we've done is today's technology, we've given people control of that experience. And so I think as we look along into the future, that experience becomes even more critical, more hyper-personalized, more, what do they want out of this, and is it a meaningful interaction? I think that's where we ought to focus.
Interesting, okay. And we're using words like hyper agility here. Hyper automation is another element here. Gartner are phrasing, terming that, this is the new trend. What's anticipated? Like, what's the impact of hyper automation in an organization? Why do more and more organizations need to invest in automation of their workflows?
So I guess at PMI, we talk a lot about maturity, right? Maturity going from the early stages of discovery through to the innovation stage, right? And that's a big journey. So I think you need to break it down and think, is an organization automating things at a very discovery or experimentation or level, or are they actually an automation-first organization? Because the operating model and the culture and the way of thinking, the governance, the structures are very different, right? Depending on where you are in that journey. So, automation, we talk about it a lot, the cost savings, the ability to differentiate in the market, bring things to market faster, the speed, the agility. But really, for me, what I love about it, and when I speak to big organizations about this, is that it changes the possibilities of what you can do as an organization, right? So I think where we were 5 years ago is very different to where we are now in terms of what can we build, what can we do, right? The art of the possible gets us thinking differently. And if you think about citizen development, right? And I look at, hyper automation, hyper agility, citizen development, they're all catalysts for faster change, right? They're enablers. But it really comes down to, if we really look at this around accessibility, right? How do I decentralize decision-making, decentralize application development, decentralize automation to the front line where people can actually make a difference? That accessibility is really the key driver at the moment.
Okay, interesting. Vincent, any thoughts?
I come from a a heavy financial services background, insurance primarily, and I've worked across the globe in different cultures. And automation from a legacy or traditional perspective, you always view it from a cost and optimization perspective, right? But I think going forward, we ought to be talking about growth and transformation. And it's really about, I think, when you talk about knowledge workers, how much time does a knowledge worker do something that can be maybe made cognitively automated, right? What do I mean by that? It's AI-based, it's ML-based, and the automation can learn from itself and continue to improve. And the value of that, in my mind, is you're able to free up the human being to do something. Forget value adding, that's of course an expectation, but maybe something that can tap into more creativity. And they can be a happier employee or a happier user. And that will translate to maybe simpler and more innovative products and services that brands offer out there, right? And if we're able to achieve that, then I think the cost and optimization requirements kind of fall on its own. And then automation becomes, a tool for activating growth and transformation and helping people be more creative.
Fantastic. So this is about total user experience. It's about kind of managing every aspect. We touched on this in the previous session, customers and employees, the whole immersive experience here. Why so popular now? What is it about this whole total experience? Why is it now that we need to react?
Me?
Yeah, why not?
So the way I think about it is this. In the future, it's already started. Purchase paths are becoming more purposeful. So tomorrow, hopefully, enterprises are more sustainable, more socially inclusive. And tied to that, I also think is, from an experience perspective, you guys said this, I think, in the prior session. Consumers have better technology than they do in the workplace for the most part, right? And so I think a part of experience is about, why am I going to put myself in a situation where if I'm not loyal to a brand specifically, and that brand doesn't necessarily advocate the things that are aligned to my values, I may not buy from that brand anymore, right? And so that's kind of how I look at it is, as a consumer myself, and we all are, right? Where am I gonna expend that valued dollar that I worked for? And whether I'm investing in equities or doing something as simple as buying apparel, right? Does that align with what I want to be or what I want the world to be in the future? That's how I think about it.
So strong competitive advantage here, making sure that the enterprise is beating the competition by providing offerings for consumers and employees alike.
Sure.
Okay, and Sam, have you any other views on that?
So I totally agree. And the only thing I'll add is I think there's been a number of compelling events that have driven the need for more automation, for new ways of working. And I'm not just talking about the elephant in the room that's obviously COVID that we all know about, but there's a ton of things that they're making us change, right? We talk about ways of working a lot, and automation is one. But I think just one point I want to make is that if you look at the companies that I speak to that are really doing this at scale, and I'm talking about delivering hundreds of millions of value from automation, is that going back to the kind of maturity model and where they are, right? To be able to automate a workflow in one department is pretty simple. To be able to actually be an automation-first organization across the enterprise, you might have to get your PMO function on board. You might have to get, you don't want to stifle innovation at the business. You want to, what's the art of the possible, right? So you want to lower the barriers for the business to automate, But how do you also get IT involved, right? So IT see this as being a sanctioned program and a sanctioned approach, right? So I think it's very much, we talk about fusion a lot, right? Creatio, freedom to create fusion teams. I see automation as being a real kind of collaboration between the business. And if they do that properly, I mean, we see huge opportunities. I mean, the sky's the limit for automation, if you think about it, right? If you really think about the use cases and what you can actually do.
Fantastic. So providing scale across an automation and making sure it's coordinated. And I think, again, another very promising trend here is around the composable enterprise approach, okay? So, that whole autonomy, the modularity, and orchestration that you mentioned, Sam. Why do you think this is becoming so important? Again, why now? Enterprises have been around for a long time. Why now?
Accessibility. I think technology is so accessible to new consumer groups. The training is there, the education is there, the enablement is there, the support and coaching is there. So I think it really is about the infrastructure that's supporting it and the accessibility of the technology. Now we have a people and process and culture problem. That's the problem, right? There's so much technology out there that it's about choosing the right technology, right? So it's about it's technology choice. When people say, oh, we've got a technology problem, it's like, no, I mean, you're here today with Creatio, right? I mean, the technology is awesome. There's so much you can do with it. But a culture, the right culture, the right operating model, understanding the risks, how those risks flow from different teams, who's accountable for what if something goes wrong, right? These are things that no one talks about. But they're the things that the companies that are doing this at massive scale have figured out.
I think, of course, accessibility is one thing, and it's important. But if you take a broader perspective, there are enterprises that were born digitally born, right? Amazon, Tesla, Facebook. These are digitally born companies, and they think a little differently, and their DNA is different. But if you talk about financial services, for example, right, and you talk about traditional technologies, over 25 years, it's been hard to this concept of reuse, for example, right? It's hard to achieve, right? Because the kind of tech stack is different. But bringing it to the point of composable architecture, I think at the end of the day, it's about how people understand the application of that technology, right? You're going down a path where citizen development is going to be a reality. In reality, as well, there's still legacy integration architectures that exist, right? And you can reuse applications and you can replicate those kinds of things. But unless it's really self-sustaining service, like really granular APIs and services, yes, it'll be composable, but it'll still be, I don't think, as easy as we think it's going to be, right?
And I think just one point on that is that the Teslas, the Amazons, the technology-first organizations, that's also been a compelling event that's driven other markets to go, we've got to keep up, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to look at, we have to, it's not like a nice to have now, we have to do automation, right? Because the way we pivot and change our business is by doing things differently, right? So I think that's a compelling event in the market.
Can I add to this?
Please.
Actually, to that point, right? If you, in 2022, 50% of the labor force and 50% of the consumers are from the millennial generation, right? So they have different expectations, right? And to your point, it pushes the boundaries on technology and consumption and use and service and that sort of thing. So I think all of that pushes all these boundaries, and there's going to be much more for us to learn in the next few years and catch up onto.
Fantastic. And to touch on, again, these processes, automating them, making them composable, reusing, where does AI, where does intelligence fit in with this? How can it combine and how can it improve the state of enterprises for 2025, do you think?
If you think about the attributes of high-performing organizations, you've said it, right? They're digital, right? So they are cloud native, they are cloud data ready, and those kinds of things. But to be truly disruptive, I think we're getting to the point where, you know, you're talking about user-owned commerce, Web3. You're talking about, you know, potentially AR and VR, and that's where I think AI, you know, also becomes even more disruptive than it is today. But again, in the context of what I had talked about earlier, which is as much cognitive automation, or as much AI can be put in place, you know, maybe people are worried about jobs and those kinds of things. I actually think it creates additional roles wherein, you know, people can then manage, you know, that AI so that they can be more creative and do something more powerful.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vincent. Sam, any thoughts around the AI and how it can interact with automating process?
So, not really. I think I agree. I think it's kind of down to also the applicability of it. I think, you know, artificial intelligence and, you know, data science in these worlds, we are seeing more citizens having access to this now because of technology, right? So technology has really been the enabler to drive that. And it's about what you do with it, right? Because it's all good having this as a capability in the business, but again, how is it being managed in the right way? You know, what repeatability are you building into your business that allows other teams to be able to benefit from this rather than siloed projects? And as soon as that person goes, you've got single points of failure. So that repeatability and structure, I think, is important. But I totally agree with Vincent.
Fantastic. So it helps with efficiency, and it can also help spot areas that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise identify, and therefore new opportunity and get ahead of your competition. The technology's there, the platform is there. It's more about being able to spend time, and we all value our time, but getting that bandwidth to actually do more things differently. So I think that's cool. Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you very much, Vince.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.